What's up, everybody? Welcome to WWBS. What would Bubba say? The show that is raw, the show that is uncut. It's about people because everybody's got a little Bubba in them. Now, you do not want to miss today's show. If you like crime dramas like Criminal Minds and stuff like that, you are going to love our guest today. It's phenomenal. So, we've got that and questions from a hat coming up. Stay tuned. All right, we are back. We are loving life. It is a very special show today because I've got my dear friend Greg Cooper on. And Greg Cooper is a former FBI profiler. He was also my instructor when I got my degree in my minor's criminal justice. And I think the best, most education I got of all the 112 years I was at UVU, sure felt like that, right? Was with Greg. And I actually interned for him and took all of his classes, and we've become good friends. So thrilled to have him. So, introduce you, Greg Cooper.
Great to be here, Damon.
The man.
Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be here with my buddy.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. So, tell us a couple of minutes here of just a little of your background so everybody knows kind of who you are and where you're coming from.
Sure. About 30 plus years of law enforcement experience. Started out as a police officer at Provo Police Department, after that, I was there for about altogether 5 years while I was attending BYU.
Nice.
Got a master's degree eventually and moved on to a little town called Delta, Utah.
Old Delta.
Delta, Utah. It's still there, and they've got a McDonald's now.
All 5 people are still there.
They've got a McDonald's and at least one streetlight. So,
really?
Yes.
Wow.
And I went there as the police chief when I was about 27 years old, so it was a great opportunity for me.
Police chief at 27, that's pretty intense, man.
Well, you know, you kind of
for 9 people, I wouldn't bet.
That's right. It was better to be the chief than one of the others.
Yeah.
Better be a big fish in a little pond, right?
Yeah, amen. Exactly.
So then I was fortunate enough to be selected by the FBI and was hired with the FBI in 1985. Stayed 10 years where I had the privilege of working as a profiler, a criminal profiler, and spent 5 years with John Douglas, who's what we would call the father of modern day profiling.
Yes. The father yes. Of, and just so we know, those of you who watch Criminal Minds, is the main character there, which is Joe Montana. I actually spoke to Joe personally at SHOT Show, and he says, loosely based on John Douglas.
Very loosely.
But loosely, but yeah, but that's the whole foundation of it is John Douglas, and Greg is his protege, so.
Well, yeah, it was a real honor. You know, I also had the opportunity when John retired to take his position as the unit chief for about a year there before I returned to Provo as a police chief. And stayed in Provo for about 7 years, went back to the Department of Homeland Security, helped them get that organized and managed for a while, and then I came back to Utah.
Now you did a little private sector too, didn't you?
I did. I worked with Motorola for a while and also a company called ChrisNet, which was a records management system. We put together investigative protocols for major cases.
Wow.
And went with records management systems for law enforcement agencies.
Wow. So you've been there and done that in so many aspects. I think as I think about, okay, so as I talk to friends and stuff and the TV, you know, there's Criminal Minds and some of these crime dramas, they got a huge following. And I do talk to people a lot that go, I want to be a forensics guy, or I want to be a profiler. And I actually kind of start laughing because I start asking them what they really think that means. And they really don't have an idea.
Well, you know, I would say to those folks who are really interested, don't give up. I'll tell you why. I'll tell you what my personal experience was. When I was the police chief in Delta, I attended a 3-day school put on by 2 FBI agents. And I won't mention their names, but they did a great job giving the presentation. I went up to them afterwards, as after 3 days of intense training, and it's when this concept of profiling was new.
Right.
And I went up to talk with one particular agent and told him, look, you know, I've had one of these aha experiences.
Right.
This is what I'm supposed to do. So I asked him, what's the best way to do that? Because I'd already applied to the FBI, but there was a hiring freeze.
Right.
So he said, well, you know, it's really difficult to get in the FBI, and in order to get into this unit, it's very competitive. So first things first. At least you got to get in the FBI. Then worry about it after that. But in other words, it wasn't really encouraging, what you'd say.
Right.
So to make a long story short, about 6 months later, I was contacted by the FBI, and based upon my original application, and they asked if I was still interested because the hiring freeze had come off. So,
right, nice.
So of course I was, and they offered me the position. I won the FBI in 1985, and I was, I guess what you'd say, rescued from Delta.
Nice.
And therein starts the beginning story of how I end up getting into the profiling unit. 5 years later, I was assigned to the unit, and to make a long story short, I ended up supervising that particular agent. That didn't give me much encouragement. Yeah. So what I'd say?
Did you fire him?
No, he's an excellent profiler.
That's good. Okay, cool.
I would say don't give up. If that's where your heart is, then you go after.
Right, and it can be stressful. You know, some of the realities of it. I know you and I talked when I did my case study.
Yes,
and we were talking about ways because of the gravity of the material and stuff. You've got to have an outlet, exercise, or something to balance and offset. You know, the seriousness of what it is you're doing. Because I remember going through your classes and coming up to you after. I got to tell you, I got to tell the secret here. I kind of forced Greg to be my friend.
It's one of these guys that never give up.
I just I had time, right? So after every single class, I stayed after, and I bought all his books online and gave him stacks. Said sign them all after one of the classes. You're like, are you serious? I'm like, yep.
Okay.
So
if you want it.
You signed them all, which was cool. But we just talked every single class. We talked, and it was one of those things where eventually I came up to you and I said, man, as we profile these criminals and the worst things you can possibly imagine in history, and 10 times worse, my brain's doing some weird things.
Yeah.
Like, you know, psychology, the psychological effects of, I have commonalities with some of these guys, and everybody does, but you have to distinguish the difference. And I remember coming to you for help, saying, how do you deal with some of this stuff? Because my brain's doing some weird things, man. And that was the thing that really helped me, was understanding the differences, but understand the gravity of what you're doing, because I didn't even see 1% of what you did, and I was like going, how does he deal with this stuff?
Yeah,
how did you deal with this stuff?
To remark a little bit about the personal interest story there for you, I'll say that you were among my top 5 students after teaching there at UVU for over a period of at least 10 years,
right,
part-time, as an adjunct professor. And in terms of the ability to profile and understand the concepts, I'd have to say you're within the top 2. So congratulations. And I thought, boy, it's a good thing that this guy wants to do the right thing. We, all of us have the capacity to do good and to do evil, and it's all based upon, I like to go back to the concept of the good book, and that he who is, what we are is a product of our thoughts.
Sure.
And basically, eventually, if we focus on bad thoughts, evil thoughts, to harm people, regardless of what the thoughts are, or good thoughts, positive thoughts, constructive thoughts, you're going to go down one road or the other.
Right.
And criminals do the same thing. When they get focused on committing a crime, they don't just wake up one day and decide, I think I'm going to go out and commit this horrible crime. No, it's a process. It's a step-by-step process, just like it is for those of us who want to go out and do constructive things.
Right.
One step at a time, and eventually they find themselves wrapped up into an obsession with committing violent crimes for those particular types of criminals that I'm talking about, of course. So, yes, it's a choice. And I always used to think Damon was so good at this. I thought, he's one of the good guys, fortunately, because he's got the ability to think both ways. And as a profiler, you have to vicariously put yourself in 2 different roles. Number one, the victim. Always understand what that victim went through. And then secondly, the offender. Who is this individual? Where did they come from in terms of their background and experience? What experiences did they have when they were growing up to bring them, that may have influenced their certain choices? What kinds of habits might they have? What types of employment might they be involved in, et cetera? And so as you vicariously experience that, it becomes quite disturbing, you can imagine. And I can tell you that I was back in the unit for 5 years, and of all the profilers that I knew, usually there was a turnover about every 5 years. Now, I would have stayed back there had I not decided to come back to Provo as a police chief.
Right.
It was always a goal that I had had and a desire, and fortunately it came at the right time. There were things happening in the FBI that I wasn't exactly excited about, and so the timing was right.
Right. Cool.
So, yeah, and when you take a look at those profilers on this average of every 5 years, and look at experience that they've had with respect to health, I don't know of anybody that I've associated with over the years that has not had health issues that I'm certain is related to that experience.
Sure. You know, and speaking of that, and that was one thing that really shocked me when we were doing the case study when I was interviewing you and Dean. But one thing I always remembered, and I've told a lot of people this, especially in the last few years as we've gone through this thing against law enforcement and the hatred and these shootings and all this kind of stuff. I find it very interesting when you have some great cops, and you do have some attitudinal cops. You know, there's people are people regardless of what you do. And I remember specifically when we were going over every aspect of the offender, job, careers, mentalities. We were going over all that stuff. And what really blew my mind was the fine line between like trades, like working man stuff, construction, military, some of that, masculine, adrenaline, what's the word I'm looking for? Testosterone.
Testosterone,
yeah.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, maybe that too, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of testosterone man-related subjects and serial criminals. There is sometimes a very fine line. It's just a matter of what they decide to do. Either they're going to do good or they're not. And sometimes they'll even choose a career that is supposed to be good, but then cross the line during the career. So I just thought that was phenomenal because I tell people sometimes there's a fine line between the cop and the guy he's chasing.
Yeah.
Very fine line. There's a lot relatable, and I'm not trying to speak ill of law enforcement or anything like that. It's just very, very interesting things that we were talking about during class. I tell you, I don't know if I told you, like I would come home, my wife would be like all positive. How was class, honey? And I was like, it was awesome.
Let me
What'd
show
you talk
what
about?
I learned.
Yeah, what'd you go over? You don't want to know. Because this week it's old. Yeah. Anyway, so without getting really cruel, right? And I just tell her, don't even ask because it's going to give you nightmares for weeks, But do you remember that one we were talking about, that one case? And I'm not going to go into it because we were showing crime scene photos. And it was just the most horrific thing, and there was a shotgun in the photo.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody was sitting there looking at it. And one of the things as a student is you're going through this stuff in not having the experience of Greg and these other guys, you don't know how to deal with it. So humor is one of those things that we would fall back on in the class quite often. And everybody sat there staring at this photo for about 2 or 3 minutes, and you were talking and lecturing, and then we were just sitting there staring at it. I finally raised my hand and knowing what I do, right, the gun stuff. And you're like, question. And I just raised my, looked over and I go, what kind of gun is that?
What caliber is that? Yeah.
And everybody looked at me like, you're kidding me, right?
Well,
like, how do you deal with that stuff, man? That was a messed up deal, but I was
terrible.
Interested in guns. It was a waste of a side-by-side for sure,
That was a terrible crime scene. And that ends up being significantly, that particular crime, and those 3 crimes that we talked about in conjunction with that, ends up being the first set of crimes utilized by John Douglas, who was the first profiler, to testify as an expert and link crimes together by the behavioral aspects of that crime scene.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Man,
First
that's
time.
amazing. Well, and speaking of John Douglas, let's segment into what you're doing now, the Cold Case Foundation.
Yeah.
I want to hear about that because this is, how can you guys who love this crime drama and love Criminal Minds, you think all that stuff is amazing, how can you actually be a part and help solve cold cases? And so let's talk about how you can do that because this is directly related to what John and Greg are doing now.
You bet. I'm the executive director for the Cold Case Foundation, and John Douglas is our chairman of the board. This is an exciting project that we've been involved in, and it's really starting to pick up a lot of inertia and momentum, both in terms of exposure and workload.
Right.
What we need to do catch up on, of course, is funding. It's a nonprofit foundation.
Well, what is the purpose? What exactly is the exact purpose?
You bet. It's to provide assistance to law enforcement agencies and victims' families to solve unsolved homicides, missing persons, unidentified bodies, and sexual assaults where there appears to be a serial nature or significant aspect to the crime.
So let me break in here and say this. When my last class before I got my bachelor's was case studies, as you remember.
Yeah.
I interviewed Greg, I interviewed Dean, and I did a lot of research on law enforcement. And on average, across the United States, law enforcement is dealing or operating under about 35% of what they need. So they're in a deficit of training, funding, material, manpower, etc. It's equipment, gear, all that stuff. So now that you guys have founded the Cold Case Foundation and they're actually helping to fill that void in this particular area is super, super important. Having said that, I'm going to go back to you and let you continue talking about your progress there.
Thank you. There are approximately, on the average, about 15,000 homicides per year. That goes up and down every year. But on the average, make a long story short, and a lot of statistics, if you go to our website, coldcasefoundation.org, we're also on Facebook and Twitter. Check us out, like us.
Coldcasefoundation.org, and I know .com will forward because I played with that the other day.
That's good.
I'm pretty sure that I did. I'm going to check that again because I don't remember the org, so I must have done .com, and it did forward. So
we decided to do org because the nonprofit
status. Absolutely. But you want the real estate, you want the URL, so it's going to forward to .org anyway.
That's
having said that, right?
Oh, we're learning. We're learning all the technology aspects of it.
There's a lot too.
There really is.
Yep.
So when you consider the amount of homicides that we have and the fact that 35, sometimes 40% of those homicides are unsolved by the end of the year.
Wow.
Now, this is every year. I'm not talking about once every 2 years, 3 years, 10 years. This is every single year, so it compounds every year. So we've got well over 100,000 unsolved cases, well over 100,000 unsolved cases in the last 15 years.
So if you go back farther, it's just more ridiculous because technology now, I would think, would help solve them as opposed to 20, 30 years ago.
It's interesting, isn't it?
So it should be, golly.
And typically the easy, so to speak, let me put it this way, the more difficult crimes, the cold cases, there's reasons why they're cold, and there's legitimate reasons why they're cold cases. When that happens, it's not because, and don't misunderstand, it's not because law enforcement agencies they lose the interest. No, absolutely not. Particularly those investigators that took that case on personally. I can tell you this from experience that it will haunt those investigators the rest of their career, frankly, the rest of their lives, unless it is solved. That's their mission. But then, as a career goes, they get reassigned, etc. So a lot of times, depending on where these crimes occur, organizations lack the funding, the resources, the training, the experience. So these are some of the contributing factors to unsolved cases. Additionally, they're just difficult cases. There's maybe a lack of circumstantial evidence, a lack of forensic evidence. Maybe the individual, the victim, has disappeared. They don't have the body. So that goes on for years like that as a missing person. And the fact is, it's going to be a homicide in most cases. So anything from the scientific aspect of investigation up to and including the lack of training and funding to complete these cases are those legitimate reasons why they continue to go on cold. So John and I originally got together years ago and thought, while we were working together, wouldn't it be nice after our careers to create an organization where we could help law enforcement agencies? And that's exactly what we've done. We've got connections and networks with law enforcement people all around the country.
Awesome.
A number of people that whoever wants to can sign up on our website who are experts. Experienced people who may be retired, even those who aren't retired, more than welcome to put them up on our website. They have volunteered their time, their services, their talents and abilities and are working with us from all over the country. And it's just an amazing kind of response that we're getting. So now we're getting, one of the initial concerns that we had is get too much work, not enough people.
Yeah.
Because it's a nonprofit.
Yeah.
So we waited, and everything's been volunteer. Waited until the time was right to really start the social media campaign and advertising campaign. Now we're equipped, I think, well enough with our resources, manpower resources, that we can respond to just about anything that comes across.
I looked on the website. I remember there was about 5 people starting out.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, not including Kevin and me. They were just helping with some marketing,
that's right.
and logo,
you
and some
Kevin,
of that stuff.
Absolutely.
But I mean, with you and Mike and John,
sure.
And Dean and
we've got
finance lady. I totally blanked on her name.
Oh, Lorraine.
That's right. Sorry, Lorraine.
Lorraine. So Lorraine's left. She's not with us. She,
really?
Now she went full time with another organization.
Okay.
We've got Francine Bardot on there, who's a crime scene investigator.
I look at the website. There's like 20 people on there now, or something.
Yeah,
I was like,
and those
holy
aren't
smoke.
That's right. And those aren't the only ones that are working with us. Those are just the ones that are interested in putting up their face,
their bio on
and
the
their
website.
little bio.
Right. Nice.
So, but we're working with cold case units across the country and assisting them as well. So,
so what do you guys need? What do you need particularly?
Well, we always need more resources in terms of manpower resources. So if there are any professionals out there with experience, contact us. If you're interested in participating with us, love to talk with you and hook you up with us. Now, with every organization, you need funding.
Yep.
And we provide funding to law enforcement agencies who lack the training, or funding rather, for manpower work, for example, to continue to work those cases. They lack training. We provide training. Training in anything from criminal investigative analysis or criminal profiling to interview, what we call prescriptive interview interrogation techniques, major case management courses, crime scene investigation, runs the gamut. Expert witness and testimony. If you need a crime assessment, crime analysis, give you an opinion as to what we think, who the offender is, who the most likely suspects may be, what types of approaches to address them with if you're considering an interview interrogation approach, prosecutive strategies, anything that the FBI investigative support, that when I was assigned to it, now is referred to as the behavioral science unit.
Right.
Any service that they provide, which is difficult for them because they have lack manpower too. There's only probably 12 guys, or maybe upwards to 20 now. And it's changed a bit back there. But in terms of services that unit provides, we provide the same thing, except we provide it at no cost. We don't charge law enforcement. We don't charge victims. So we're in a constant fundraising campaign in order to develop and meet that ability in order to be able to respond and give them the help they need.
Nice. So I'm going to look right into the camera and say, hey, if you have a skill set that these guys can utilize, then volunteer if you have the time and you want to do that. Plus, you can get some huge education, probably in areas you'd never learned in post, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. As well, if you're a person like me who's more on the novice side of things but enjoys the crime drama TV and you actually want to help law enforcement, you want to and help get some of these things taken care of, then go to the website and you can donate and help them get the resources to continue doing what they're doing. And let me just tell you guys, I endorse these guys 100%. Greg and John are legit, okay? You're not going to find better profilers, the father of criminal profiling, and his #1 bro right here, okay? So, and these guys aren't going to take your money and run like some of these stupid organizations do. That's not the purpose. I've known that for the years, actually before it got going, we talked about how big we dreams and all that kind of fun stuff, and he got me caught up in it and everything, and we've really been, working. Greg's done tons, and John, to get these things going. And I can say I helped a little bit, which has been really fun and enriched my life, and Kevin Gullidge as well, because he's the master, right?
Absolutely.
At what he does. But this is a legit organization, and that's why I want to have Greg on, so that you guys can understand that you can help solve these cases by giving what you can give, whether it be resources or knowledge, skill sets, or something like that, maybe connecting with someone or spreading the word so that they can do what they are founded to do. Which we need desperately to fill those gaps. So
absolutely, thank you, Damon. And let me say too, when this concept started to materialize, Damon and Kevin Gullidge were primary resources for us.
I bought breakfast.
Yeah, I think I bought more of them.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I think so. But if you take a look at our website, the original website that we had, and you take a look particularly at our logo, that's a direct result of my participation with a number of folks, but the primary people involved in that was Kevin and Damon, and it's a fantastic logo.
That
it's
logo
cool.
is
It's
okay.
cool.
So go to the website, and there's a portion on the website that has little dots, and you hover your mouse over it. It tells you what every aspect of that logo means.
It's symbolic.
It is so
It's cool.
Cool. It is. Everybody I've ever showed that to is like, wow, that is amazing.
Why don't you explain a little bit on how we came up with that thing, what we went through?
Well, this is really Kevin's baby when I talk about that, because he's the marketing genius. But essentially what we did is he put us through a process of every word that can relate, and every color that can relate, and every symbol and animal that means this. Or, I mean, do you remember that?
Oh, man.
Hours of go. We're all like, oh my gosh. And we were there from breakfast and lunch, I think, on that one aspect. And then we started whittling it down, and what do you think of this and this and this and this? I felt like the eye examiner. This one or this one? This one or this one? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and then once it got, and he's putting it up right there. And then once, we
cool.
got that, we actually went to logo tournament and had a guy jump on. He was just spectacular, this guy. I don't even remember who it was, but the guy was amazing. And so then we actually paid him for that, and then we got him outside of logo tournament and tweaked it some more and some more and some more. And
wasn't there like 300 people that looked at it and submitted?
Oh yeah, we had like 300 submissions, and this guy waited to the very end,
unbelievable,
like 2 days before the end of the tournament, and jumped on and blew everybody out of the water. We're like, holy cow, let's go with that guy. So with our, all the input of everybody, we have 2 sets of wings on there. We have the building with the pillars. We have the light beams, Phenum Exitus. I mean, everything has a specific
Case closed.
Case closed. Yeah, it's phenomenal. Literally one of the best logos I've ever seen in my life.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? So, and that just proves that what these guys are doing is really thought out. It's legit. It's genuine. They're honest, and they're the best in the world at what they do. So,
we look at this as it's not just a job. I mean, it's a mission for sure. But
sure.
I mean, even from a religious perspective, you could say it's a ministry. Certainly,
sure.
it's a nonprofit, but we are committed and devoted to this to that level. I mean, this is something that we'll do the rest of our lives, and we're committed to it, and hope to see that the legacy will go on and continue to help law enforcement agencies and victims' families come to resolution.
That's amazing.
It's horrible for these families who continually, year after year, have to deal with these open cases where their daughter, their mother, their sister, their girlfriend, wife, for example, was subjected to horrendous type of violent crime. And no answers. No answers.
Just the unknown.
A death is bad enough.
Yeah,
dealing
exactly.
with the death of a loved one, but
yeah.
to imagine them taken from you under
or
those
just
circumstances,
disappearing
is horrible.
completely.
Absolutely.
And just, you don't know. I mean, I remember that scout a few years back here, and went back to camp about a half a mile back by himself, and no one ever saw him again.
That's right.
And just vanished. And people are like, oh, an animal. No, animals leave trace, folks, and sign. Yeah. Someone took him, flat out took him. And it's guys like Greg and John and the guys helping out that can hopefully really get some progress on these cases. And it is a mission.
Yeah,
it is a
absolutely.
super duper noble mission. I don't care if you love cops or hate cops. This is helping victims, and helping do things that need to be done, and that's why I'm passionate about it. And I know Greg, and 20-something years, you guys been steaming on this, and finally it's becoming a reality, and it's super exciting to see the progress and everything. So we're super excited. But main thing is, how can you help out? Well, we've given you an avenue to really, really help out. The thing I think is cool is, as we talked about in the classes, is in the FBI program, they don't teach necessarily the same thing anymore. It's more like psychology, and with a criminal twist. It's not, it's not criminal profiling.
Seems like the emphasis has changed a bit.
Yeah,
they don't seem to be publishing as much.
Well, you came up with some really specific things, on criminal profiling, right?
That's right.
I want to say the 10. Was it the 10?
That's right, 10 filters.
10 filters.
There you
That's
go.
right.
Good job.
And,
See,
I still remember something. And I took actually victimology and criminal profiling at the same time, and victimology is one of the steps and then one of the filters of criminal profiling. So I was getting double dose.
That's right.
And not only was I reading all the textbooks, I was reading all the extra books.
Yes.
So in one semester, I read like 7 books, 2 classes. People are like, how do you do that? Like, it took a lot of time, but once you get going, you just eat that stuff up.
Yeah.
You know, and it's an education though. But I'm telling some of you novices out there, and even law enforcement that don't have his experience, you can get on board because the education that he can provide to help you and to help you help the organization is phenomenal.
Thank you.
Second to none. I mean, second to none.
Well, and for training possibilities for law enforcement agencies, we're available to do that and give them a dimension of training that you're not going to get at any police academy, for example, simply because it's not generally the kinds of crimes that we're talking about are exceptions to the rule, but the principles that we talk about in terms of those principles that contribute to solving those difficult crimes, same principles that you'd apply across the board to any criminal analysis, criminal assessment, to understand who the offender was. And of course, the more you know about that offender, the better opportunity you have in order to identify potential suspects and then approach them the right way when it comes to interview, interrogation. And you mentioned victimology. Victimology is the number one thing that we look at when we start any investigation. Oftentimes, the first thing a police officer or detective thinks of when he arrives at the crime scene is, well, you know, who did it? Well, of course, that's what you want to know. But in terms of solving the crime, that's not the first question that needs to be answered, because at that particular moment, it could be anybody, right?
Yep.
It's possible anybody could have done this, if anybody that was here at that particular time and place. So the first question that needs to be asked is, who's the victim? The more we know about the victim, now we begin to understand who that offender was, why that offender selected the victim, why that offender chose that particular weapon, that particular location, etc.
See, that's what blew my mind going through the classes with you is I never would have dreamed in a million years to learn more about the offender by studying the victim.
Absolutely.
And so as we were going through and stuff and learning all those things, the thing that really hit me hard during this semester, because as a minor in criminal justice, I was in with all the people that were majoring in criminal justice, which means a vast majority of them would go right into law enforcement. They're going to be cops or whatever it may be. So the thing that blew my mind was saying, man, if they could really teach this in post. Of course, they can't teach us in post. There's too many other things to learn. But post doesn't teach almost anything compared to what real life scenarios are. I mean, post is like, you know what I mean? It's very basic.
It's
and
just
stuff.
to be able to qualify them to get out on the street and know what they're doing.
And you guys you'll do lectures, right, and stuff.
Oh, yeah,
because the thing that I thought was if law enforcement, especially the ones that get there first, the ones that arrive on scene and they've got to lock down the crime scene and put tape up or whatever it is they got to do. If the first thing to do is, like you're saying, who did this or what happened. If they understood and had that awareness to read a crime scene at a higher level, then they would absolutely react and act differently when they got there, what the orders and the procedures and policies would be to preserve that so that someone can come, because it could be one thing that cracks open everything.
Absolutely.
And if they go and mess it up, which happens all the time.
Yeah.
It makes you don't see those movies, they messed up the crime scene. Happens all the time, folks. Guess what? All the time. So, having that education and understanding the importance of every aspect of that on a street cop level is massive.
Wonderful.
So you guys being able to go and lecture out and talk and maybe educate some of the law enforcement so that it'll help you do your job better, better, and them do their job better.
Yeah, the more they know, the better they'll do, and the less they'll need any other ability to come in.
And that's where the funds come in. That's hard, but you guys are nonprofit, so you can provide some of that education that posts can't do and the departments don't have time and money for. So that's really amazing.
We also lecture to private sector, private industry. Talking about when we talk about victimology, violence in the workplace. Look at the school situation going on. Violence in the schools.
That's not a hot topic or anything.
Oh man, isn't that horrible? Just unbelievable. So we'll come in and give a presentation on risk assessment. Certain personality types that people should be concerned about or be aware of. To watch behaviors that may be indicative of future criminal offense. The more people are equipped with knowledge, the better choices they can make, right?
Sure.
and we've got a book out, for example, called Predators, Who They Are and How to Stop Them. In fact, we used that as one of our textbooks.
Oh, good.
In
Read
crime.
it?
Yeah.
Yep, twice.
Uh-huh.
Yep, phenomenal. It's on my book list. I give all my concealed students, by the way.
Well, do you really?
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic.
It's phenomenal. My top 8.
Excellent.
Yes.
Well, we've included in that the 10 filters. We talk about the 10 filters. We talk about rape typologies. And there are several different cases, as you recall, that Mike King and I are the co-authors, along with Tom McCose. Wrote that book about, 9 years ago, I guess, something like that, 8 years ago. But all of the principles still apply. And that is
psychology, right?
Yeah.
So
well,
behavior.
it's that, and we look at the specific crimes through the victim's eyes, through the offender's eyes, and through the detective or the profiler's eyes.
Right.
And then at the end of each chapter, there's a portion of lessons learned and what the reader can do to prevent themselves from becoming a victim of those particular types of crimes.
Wow.
So
even in the self-defense game, it's all preventative. Having an awareness to recognize something, to not get into a situation, or recognize the red flags to avoid situations.
Cues.
Exactly, environmental cues. Good, thank you. Exactly.
I was just working a case right now of a horrible sexual assault that was committed years ago in another state, and it's about the crime is about 30 years old now. The victim is still alive. The offender has been in prison for about 30 years.
Wow.
Was originally sentenced to 63 years.
Wow.
He's coming up for parole.
Oh, jeez.
So,
geez.
coming up for parole. Now, out of those, he's around 50 years old. Out of those 50 years, he's maybe been out on the street from the time he was 16 until now, been on the street for maybe a year and a half. And now they're considering to parole him. Well, if you take a look at the behavioral aspects of this particular crime and two other crimes that we're very aware of, I'm convinced that this individual is not only going to come back out and reoffend, but now there's one more thing he's going to do. He's not going to let his victim survive, because that's what has testified against him.
There you go. So he'll take it to the next level.
So I'm in the process now of constructing a risk assessment and an opinion to the parole board, so hopefully they'll read that and see things through a different perspective.
Nice. So we got a question here. So it says here on Facebook, what are some criminal personalities we should be watching out for? Ooh.
All of them.
That's an easy answer, isn't it?
I think the specific characteristics you might be concerned about, particularly in your daily interactions, are those people that have tendencies or characteristics of what we may call the antisocial personality. Take some time to read about that, and I think as I describe a little bit of those folks, you'll think of some people that you've associated with that may have some of those characteristics. Typically, these are individuals that don't have the ability to connect emotionally very well with people. They have a tendency to have to be number one in everything. They can top your story, top your experience, top everybody's experience they're talking to. Their experience is either better, badder, or worse than anybody else's.
We all know someone like that.
Don't we? Yeah.
Yes.
They may ask you for favors, and you'll anytime you may want a favor back, they don't either have the time, they're not available, you can't contact them, they disappear. Yeah, that's all focused.
Yep.
They don't have this sense of emotional attachment to people generally, but particularly to their victims. They don't have the ability to empathize, put themselves in the position of that victim. In other words, what would it be like to be this individual? If they could, they wouldn't be committing that particular act, particularly violent acts. But even those situations where people are committing thefts, there's reasons why they do these things. And you have to look at their background, their experience, their behavior, and their interactions with people, what their former miscellaneous types of criminal activity may have been. They may borrow something from you, and you'll never see that thing again. They'll disappear, and it'll disappear. or when you do get it back, it may be broken.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, right.
And they don't offer. They're not going to offer to fix it because they'll be able to blame it on something else.
Yeah, exactly.
They never accept responsibility for that their activity, their particular blame game, if you will. They want to project it onto something or somebody else. It's either the circumstance situation, or another person caused it, or what happened to me. They turn themselves into the victim, etc. So if that gives you some thoughts about the kinds of folks that you deal with on a daily basis.
Not saying that all those folks are going to go out and commit
no, particularly violent criminals.
Sure, exactly.
But they all start somewhere.
Yeah.
And typically most of us are not going to be, these are exceptional crimes, these violent crimes that I'm used to looking into. But those folks all started somewhere. They all started somewhere, and they didn't start with a violent crime.
Yeah.
As an example, a rapist, for example, generally a serial rapist is going to start by being what we refer to as a peeping Tom. They're voyeurs. They look in windows at night to see who's in there, who's vulnerable, who the potential victims that they could target, and they fantasize. Along with that fantasy, it's fantasy-driven, always fantasy-driven. Even for an individual that goes out and commits a theft, a shoplifting situation. They've thought about this thing before. It didn't just all of a sudden occur to them when they're standing there in front of the candy counter. Oh,
dude, those Oreos look awesome.
Oh, yeah, I better take that. No,
that's right.
No,
they've been thinking about Oreos for a while.
Well, you know what they've been thinking about is the excitement, the
rush.
The rush that it gives them when they can have that level of power and control. Even a kid who goes in and steals, shoplifts, he's experienced, maybe for the first time in his life, a level of power, dominion, and control over a situation that he's never had before. And if he's having troubles at home, where he feels powerless at home, he's not being taken well care of, maybe there's been abuse or negligence.
Find it somewhere else.
So he's got to replace it somewhere else.
Right.
It's an absence, so he's got to go out and find balance somewhere. So they start going out and doing those things that will give them some level of self-esteem. So it replaces that absence of self-esteem in other ways, and it ends up being illegitimate ways.
Sure.
So typically we look at criminal behavior and suggest that criminal behavior, at least in my opinion, most of it is motivated by legitimate needs. Look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But they satisfy those legitimate needs through illegitimate means, criminal behavior. Because for once they find out that here they have more power and control over a situation, over a person, over a set of circumstances for the first time in their life. And in a distorted, perverted way, they satisfy to some level those needs that we all experience. Criminals have the same needs that non-criminals have. Yeah. We're human beings. Yeah.
So is that a good answer to your question?
Long answer. Sorry. Yeah.
It's all good. So I mentioned one thing I was just thinking about, and I'll ask one last question here. But did I ever show you that paper I did in school? I did a research comparison paper between high-level politicians and serial criminals.
Really? Well, I can think of some similarities, lacking the violence.
Well, and it's different ways, depending on how you look at it. Whether you order the kill or whether you kill, you're involved. But the thing that I thought was interesting, what it came down to, from what I came to my conclusion, is it came down to the same two things: power and control.
There you go. Power, domination,
power, control.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let me ask you real quick, as we're kind of ending our time here.
No, it's ending.
I know we've had too much fun. Like, we could go on and on. So these school shootings. Now, in my opinion, people are like, oh, they're having tons of them, and okay, I get that. Part of the problem is the information, is that we get information worldwide, globally, instantly now, where 20, 30 years ago we didn't. Yeah. So now having awareness of everything everywhere, it seems like there's a massive increase. I think there probably has been some, but I don't think it's as grave as everybody thinks it is. But going to these school shootings and stuff like that, I remember making a comment on a blog or something years ago, and I said, the media needs to stop giving them their 15 minutes of fame, and they won't do it. And she says, well, you don't know what's in their mind. And I said, well, actually, and I quoted all your books and John Douglas and said, go read these books, you'll find out exactly why they're doing it. Yeah. So in your opinion, what is the main purpose behind these kids? psychos, idiots, whatever you want to call them, doing what they're doing.
I think sometimes, and these are issues, our deputy director, Dean Jackson, who's playing a huge role in getting into the private sector, as well as schools right now, and presenting some training opportunities. I think sometimes psychology, sociology, sometimes tries to get too sophisticated about coming up with models and theories about why criminals commit criminal behavior, and particularly these violent, bizarre, horrible crimes like the ones you're talking about at these schools. But as you take a look at each of those offenders and look in their background and their experience and the kinds of experiences that they're having at home, what they came from, not necessarily, and don't misunderstand, I'm not blaming the home life. I'm saying experiences they are having in the home and the experiences that their parents may be having with them. Most of the time, their parents have been aware of some odd behaviors, interesting behaviors, bizarre behaviors. Typically, these guys are antisocial personalities. They're not what you would call well-known. They're in the school, if they happen to be a student that was a student in that particular school.
Not the popular crowd, huh?
Yeah, not the popular crowd. They're not the successful athlete or successful person in the drama club or successful on the band. No, these are individuals that typically stay to themselves. They have a large fantasy life that they get lost in because that's where they find most of their meaning. Their social interactions are minimal. They might have one or two friends that are similar or play maybe a leadership role to them or a mentorship role to them that also may be a motivator. And so typically they feel like they're rejects of society, rejects out there on the line, And so now, for the first time in their life, they make this decision. They've been thinking about this for a while. This isn't something they just popped up with. And they make this decision, and we look at precipitating stressors, what's going on in their life, what's creating stress in their life, and then generally a triggering event, some event that seems to be close to the commission of that crime, that put them over the top, that made them make that, influence them to make that final decision and commitment to go out and fulfill that fantasy. So for the first time in their life, they go out and commit a crime where they have absolute power, domination, and control over vulnerable, helpless, weak victims otherwise. And, we've yet to be able to see a situation where victims who have been approached under that set of circumstances could test their level of confidence or courage that offender may have. But I suggest, my sense is that these individuals are not courageous. They're not heroic by any stretch of the imagination.
Amen.
In fact, they're the failures of society. And these are the ones that if an individual was able to run at them, if victims had the presence about them to be able to turn and run toward that offender with the mindset of making that offender their victim, I suggest that as soon as that offender felt any level of risk, they'd immediately drop that weapon or run or fall to the ground because they're cowards.
Even one of the shootings, the teacher turned around, looked at him, and said, "Stop!"
That's right.
He just stopped, dead
Absolutely.
cold, right there.
You bet.
Hello.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Phenomenal, phenomenal, phenomenal. We have had an amazing show today. We want to thank Greg for coming by. He is the man in Cold Case Foundation
Happy
and
to do
everything.
so.
So it's been a pleasure, and I wish we had more time because it's just
Have
fun.
us again.
It's fun. Yeah, we'll have him on again, and we'll do this again and stuff. So for
Maybe
those
do
of
a fundraising campaign, right? Isn't that a good idea?
That's a great idea. All right, so we're talking about, right? So for those of you who are interested, Cold Case Foundation and what they're doing now, who might have a helpful skill set, you don't know unless you ask. So get on coldcasefoundation.org and email them or contact them. And those of you who want to help out and help the organization, then go ahead and donate, man. They need that resource so they can continue doing what they're doing, which is super duper important. So thank you so much, man.
Thanks,
We're so happy to have you on today, man. And so WWBS, what would Bubba say? It's a show about people because everyone's got a little Bubba in them. So you know what your action item is today? Is look up coldcasefoundation.org and help out and get these guys to the next point. And like and share this post. Okay, perfect. Like our page, share this, and let's get this out there and be a part of the WWBS community here. Okay, because we're all about people and having a better life.
Absolutely.
And all that. So it's been a lot of fun doing this kind of stuff. Okay, so there you go, folks. And if anybody has any questions, you can shoot me an email, wwbstv@gmail.com. Of course, you can always comment. Even after the show, you can comment. I'll get on there and respond.
You can get to me at gmc@coldcasefoundation.org.
GMC, Greg M. Cooper.
GMC, yeah.
GMC at coldcasefoundation.org.
That's it.
Okay. And we'll get you guys connected, and anybody has interest, we'll make it happen. So Thanks tons. And any last comments, parting?
No, thank you. This has been great. We've enjoyed
Fantastic.
It.
So
Hopefully
tune in.
The audience has enjoyed it.
I hope so. You better have enjoyed it, right?
Let us know. Say yes, so they'll have me back.
That's right. That's right. Like and comment, and we're not bringing you back. Awesome. So thanks again. We appreciate everybody hanging in for the show and sharing and all that kind of stuff. And next week's going to be awesome too, as long as he doesn't reschedule. We got Sean Bardadas coming on. He's a really cool guy, former student of mine and stuff, and movie review guy and everything. Does a podcast. It's kind of fun. So, but coldcasefoundation.org, that is a place to be. WWBS TV, I heard Facebook. And like, share, and all that kind of stuff. I can't repeat it enough. So thank you, everybody. And for sure, we will see you next week.
Thanks, guys.